Former Congressman Ron Paul believes the U.S. should stay out of the Ukraine. Here's what he told RT earlier today.
Absolutely. I don't think we have any business there. The Europeans are involved. The Russians are involved. I think it would be nice that we consider the Ukrainians. It's their civil strife, their civil war, and deciding who's going to run that country should be left to them. Unfortunately, others get involved, and it seems like it's irresistible for the United States to be involved. But the majority of the American people right now are starting to agree with me on this issue. There's no sense in us getting involved. We certainly don't want to send troops in. Right now, we're out of money. So this idea that we're going to start bailing out Ukraine is a total nonsense. I don't see how we can afford that, nor should we do it.
Speaking of a bailout, the EU, the news today, is offering $15 billion in aid to the Ukraine. What do you think about that? Is that the right move?
Well, I think that's silly. I think it's just as silly as if we offered it, because in many ways that's what we're doing. We're offering it because the dollar still is pretty strong compared to other currencies. The Europeans right now have to bail out some of their own countries like Greece and Italy and places like that. They have to go and borrow the money. We're very much involved. I think their main goal is to bail out the banks, because I'm sure the Ukrainians owe a lot of money to banks, so that's why there's an interest involved. But if $15 billion is coming from the EU, it's also coming from the United States. They're probably also talking about the IMF. And the money's just not there. It makes no sense whatsoever. It just props up bad investments. And, you know, the one irony of all this is, let's say they do send some money to Ukraine, and the EU and the United States are supposed to be fighting with Russia right now. Well, who knows? Maybe the money will go to the Ukraine and they'll pay their bills and pay for the gas that they're getting from Russia. So that would be one irony, and maybe the bankers have that set up. But the whole thing makes no sense whatsoever from an economic viewpoint, from a political viewpoint. It's always vying for controls, and I think that's what's going on.
Certainly, the EU, the U.S. sees some value in doing this if they're going to make this kind of contribution. I want to ask you, I mean, what do you think America's interests are in Ukraine?
Okay, American interest in the Ukraine, of course, I think it's financial, and it's control. It's which way Ukraine's going to go. Is it going to go east or west? And they don't believe in self-determination. They always want, America always wants their hand in things. They have an empire to build and defend. And I think it's a mess. I don't think we should have an interest. If we did, it should be that we should encourage the Ukrainians to solve their problems. And once they have a government, we should be open to working with them and talking with them and being friends with them and trade with them. But no subsidies and no military and no instruction, and don't tell people what to do. That's how we've gotten ourselves into so much trouble. And this whole idea that it's argued that we have to, you know, that the Russians are being blamed for violation of sovereignty. Well, that may be up for an argument, but for us to lecture anybody about violating sovereignty, what about the sovereignty of Iraq and Afghanistan and Yemen and North Africa? And we're constantly being involved, Pakistan, and the use of drone missiles. So I think that what I'm talking about is completely opposite of what the Republicans and Democrats have talked about, of this intervention, this compulsion to be involved and to expand and protect the American empire. That's where we're getting into trouble, and I don't see any benefit coming from us trying to tell other people what to do. I don't think it's good for our national security, and it certainly isn't good for our financial security.
Mr. Paul, some conservatives say the president looks weak right now, that he's not being tough enough when it comes to Russia. What do you say to that very vocal part of the Republican Party?
You know, I hear that he's looking weak. I happen not to be a fan of the president, but if he wants to back off, and that is his goal, they said the same thing about him when they said he looked weak because he didn't end up bombing Syria. and for whatever reason, he backed off, mainly because the American people said, don't do it. But I think I don't consider that weakness. Sometimes it takes strength to stand up against the bullies who want to go and bomb people and believe that's part of our foreign policy. So I don't think it has anything to do with weakness and strength. I think it takes a lot of strength and courage to resist those people who pressure, whether it's from the military-industrial complex or for some other special interest that we're supposed to be engaged. So if he were truly backing off, I would say that takes strength. I don't think it's quite that clear because so far under this administration there has been a lot of intervention involved, the use of drones and our presence in Afghanistan. So I think it's a false idea to condemn the president because if he doesn't want to take a risk in going into an unnecessary war, I don't consider that a sign of weakness.
Mr. Paul, your position is very clear. You advocate small government, anti-intervention is what you advocate. And another congressman that advocates that is former Fox News Congressman Dennis Kucinich, and he went on Fox News last night and discussed this conflict in the Ukraine. I want to take a listen first to what he said on the network last night.
The U.S. has been involved covertly and behind the scenes with the CIA, with the National Endowment for Democracy and USAID to stir up trouble in Ukraine.
Just want to ask you to respond to that.
Well, I didn't quite get all of that, but he said something about the CIA and others stirring up trouble, and I think the gist of that is something I would agree with, because, you know, we have special forces and the CIA involved in a lot of countries. We have 800 bases around the world. We're in 130 countries. We're always involved, it seems, in somebody else's election, and we preach democracy. We finally got democracy, theoretically, you know, in Egypt. There was an election, and of course, we didn't like the person they elected. So we said, let's go back to the military. So I don't like hypocrisy, and I don't think Dennis Kucinich likes hypocrisy. For us to preach one thing, and at the same time, behind the scenes, we're doing things to stir up trouble for many, many different reasons.
Now, I know that you say that Ukraine has the right to self-determination, that they should figure out that this is their conflict and they should work this out on their own. You think that the U.S. should stay out. What do you think we should do in light of current events? What's happening over there with Russia invading? I mean, how do you think the U.S. should respond to that action?
Well, that is more complex because it involves long-term history, what the association of Crimea and Ukraine has been with Russia. Their national security interests certainly are different. I would think that sometimes they say the accusation now is Russia's position is, you know, so aggressive and so horrible. But I was wondering whether he might not have said, well, why don't we just ask George Bush what would he do if somebody did this to Guantanamo? You know, maybe they want to protect the base in Guantanamo. How would we react? And so I don't see that. But that doesn't mean that I endorse it. The convenient part about a non-interventionist pro-American foreign policy is that I don't have to make that determination because it is complex. But I do know that the people more local have more to say about it. Just geographically, I would assume that the Russians have a more justification being concerned about what's happening in their naval base in the Crimea as compared to United States. And for this reason, I think that there's the more the outsiders stay out of it, the fine. It would be nice if I could wave a wand and I tell the Russians, okay, just let the Ukrainians decide what they want to do, and the Europeans and the Americans walk away from it. Fine and dandy, but that's not likely to happen. The only thing that I might have an influence, even though I'm not an official in government anymore, my advice would be that we should stay out of it and not be a participant. If the Europeans want to negotiate and deal with Russia, I think that's in their backyard. But theoretically, I like small government, small units of government, and self-determination. And if you had a referendum referendum reflecting that, you might end up with 3 countries over there, maybe loosely tied together. Maybe they would have a confederation, but maybe you would have an East and West Ukraine, and you might have Crimea, and they could go their own way. I would think that we should always like to see smaller units of government. I loved it when the Soviet Union broke up, when 12 other countries just, seceded from the Soviet Union. So I want the right of secession and the breaking up and self-determination, and emphasize local government, and the world would be better off for it. Unfortunately, money and politics and banking interests and militarism get involved, and they get to control the strings of government, and the people lose out on these issues. So often the people who have to fight the wars and die in these wars, they are the victims. So it's the restraint of big government that is my goal. I think we would have less of these kind of problems around the world.
That was former U.S. Representative Ron Paul.